Thank you, Delilah. It's really a pleasure to be here. I hope you guys are all having as much fun as I am at this event. It's just great to get together again, face to face, see everyone in real life. So it's been a real joy, and I think the next speaker will also be a real joy. I'd like you to imagine for a moment how you could create a healthy and resilient work culture that reveals the power of superheroes in your midst. And I said superheroes. I think it's my first time saying superheroes on a stage, so a little bit uncomfortable, but I think that's what this is about. Our next speaker is here to help you do that. She's a mental health advocate and a former Minister of Health for Manitoba. Believing in the healing power of heroes and music, she has created Marvel Superhero and BTS-inspired mental health and neurodiversity programs. Please join me in welcoming Sharon Blady.
Thank you so much. Well, I thank you, David, and it's great to see that you have now said superheroes on stage for the first time. There's a first time for everything. So one of the questions I'm going to start off with is how many people, be honest, hands up, who here would not, if Captain Marvel or Wolverine walked into the room right now, wouldn't recognize them, wouldn't know them to trip on them? It's okay to be honest. Cool, that is awesome. No, you're not being asked to leave or anything. There's not like a geek cred like criteria. It's awesome that you're here and that you've got the open mind to see and figure out what this is all about. Now, hands up for those who wish Captain Marvel and Wolverine would walk into the room. Yay, okay, you're my peeps and you're going to be ambassadors, because now you're going to, I hope I'm speaking about some of your favorite characters and some of mine, I know for sure, and you're going to be part of the gateway to how we can talk about this kind of environment and how we create it and why superheroes are a relevant metaphor. And I have got one question here for whoever the tech folks are. Please tell me, is this the clicker I'm supposed to be using? Okay, good. I just realized I need that. So now, again, final question. How many of you, regardless of which side of that fence you're on, are wondering what connection can there possibly be between superheroes and a serious subject like mental health and neurodivergence? Be honest. Excellent. And that's a good question. And the reason why it's a good question is it shows that you've got a growth mindset. And I know that for a lot of folks, even folks that are part of like nerdy fandoms like myself, it's not a connection that we always make. And so I'm going to walk you through the highlights of this. This is something that has been the culmination of a lifetime's journey that began with falling in love with superheroes, Spider-Man at about 18 months, clear up to the future, living with multiple mental health and neurodivergence diagnoses, as well as time teaching in academics, being a health minister, all of these different things. And most importantly, my programs grow out of what I needed to do for my son when he was left unsupported and awaited multiple diagnoses for 10 years. And I took what I had from my own lived experience, including being a 2-time suicide survivor, and reframed things. So let's go on a superhero's journey, and I'm going to introduce you to your superheroes. Now let's see if I can, again, what am I supposed to be aiming this at? Am I doing this? I'm sorry, this is a tech thing. I will tell you I have a rather tentative relationship with technology. I either in the legislature used to explain how their BlackBerries work to my colleagues, or my kids run around going, Mom, step away from the computer. You're gonna do a thing. Okay, there we go. Nope, okay, which? Yeah, I need, where's my Yoda? Here we go. Oh my gosh, I just did it backwards. Okay, so first step in creation is often destruction. And that's kind of where, and I think the pandemic brought that to light. But one of the things that we have to do, especially around mental health and neurodivergence, is we need to bust some myths. So the first one is new normal. Okay, guess what? New normal is a fairy tale that we tell ourselves because as human beings we create and we crave certainty. So we like to create structures to give ourselves certainty. It's not a new normal. If you are writing any of your mental health, neurodivergence, or other healthcare policy, if you are carving it in stone, it's written in pencil. We are not in a new normal. We are in, whoops, I'm doing it again. Oh, good Lord. We are in a new abnormal. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We've got all these different little sayings. Everything is in flux. We have to adapt to that. Create stability where you can, but don't delude yourself into thinking anything is normal. We're in a new abnormal. Second myth, that we were fine before the pandemic. Yes, amount of diagnoses have gone up. Yes, we've seen increases in crises and people's needs for services. All the pandemic did was shine lights on things that were already broken. It highlighted those things and it found new things that were wrong. We were already the walking wounded. It's just more obvious now. Final myth, and it relates to this past one. Well, if we were all the walking wounded, can we really believe that all of our systems and supports were okay? Because we'd like to think, well, it was fine before, what do we do now? Again, same thing. Shine a light on an already broken system. I can tell you one of the phrases that I use most often as a health minister, working with some of our mental health professionals about programs they would bring in was, I get what you think you're doing. I appreciate your intention. What you've just described to me makes sense to me right now as a person who is currently in a mentally healthy place. But that process, if you were to speak to me that way or deliver that to me, if I was in crisis, you're not getting the response you think you're going to get. You're not getting the results. You're not speaking to me, because what's happened is we have created systems. If we were the walking wounded and we weren't well, we were building systems that in some cases, like Ultron here, who was meant to protect us, eventually, if they're not built right and they're not adapting and they become centered, despite as much as they're supposed to be person-centered, become centered on perpetuating themselves, they come to do us harm. So there are the first myths that we need to break, need to get over to move on. So what exactly is a superhero perspective? And what's it grounded in? Well, the future to creating mentally healthy and neuro-inclusive environments is about reframing from a strengths-based perspective. And what that means is we need to accept the fact that to educate environments and to empower people, it requires engagement. You can have the best tools in the world, you can have the best things, but if you are not giving them to people in a way that meets them where they're at and engages them, they might as well be standing there collecting dust. I cannot tell you how many tools I was given by well-meaning, highly trained professionals, clinicians, and it took me a long time to engage with them, or in some cases I had a chip on my shoulder because it was given to me like homework to fix me as a broken person. Don't should on people. It is not cool to should on people. You're not going to get engagement. So that's the other thing. We need to engage people. Well, the perspective that I come from is lived experience plus evidence-based tools provides what I call lived expertise. Those of us with lived experience have insight. We speak a certain language. We understand things. I might not have gone on the same journey as someone else, but you know what? We've lived in the same crappy mental health neighborhood. I might have been on the corner of anxiety and PTSD, and they might have been on the corner of depression and OCD, but you know what? We're still looking at the same sketchy back alley. So we've got lived expertise and nothing about us without us. And what's interesting is that reframing transforms things. We see ourselves differently, others see us differently, and when you change things at that idea of hearts, in other words, hearts, minds, and bottom lines, when we are seen differently and understood from an empathetic growth mindset perspective, and that we see the logical implications of this, well, what's interesting is you actually get more creative, productive, collaborative environments that are more sustainable with fewer retraining costs, less turnover, a more wisely used benefits package, all of these things, and ultimately, again, it transforms your bottom line. So, I have a program that is called Embrace Your Superpowers that is all based on this philosophy, and what you're going to see now is a walk through the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as some touching into places like the X-Men. I will fully admit it took me a while to realize this, but Stan Lee was my first therapist because he gave me the safe space that I never had growing up. So what is this all grounded in? Well, let's start off. Why do I use superheroes? Well, think about how we see superheroes. We see I'll use Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, frankly, is the gateway into superheroes. We all know who he is. So what do we see about Spider-Man? Oh my God, he's cool. Look at all those awesome powers he has. With superheroes, we see their powers and their assets first. But does everything go smoothly for Spidey? Does he sometimes mess up? Oh yeah, how many minutes into a movie and something's happened? Well, but what happens when Peter messes up? Like the Staten Island ferry gets split in half. Oh my God, we feel sorry for Peter. Oh my God, we see how he accidentally walked into this situation by trying too hard. And we empathize, and we hope somebody either comes along or that he's able to pull it together, but we're supportive and we hope he does better. And then what do we do when J. Jonah Jameson calls him public enemy number one? No, we understand that he is misunderstood, and we defend him. So that's how we see superheroes. Now, what happens with those of us with lived experience? Well, guess what? We are seen for problems first. Oh God, there's Dave in accounting, and he's got an anxiety disorder. What's the meltdown going to be this week? Oh, it's such a burden. And that's the kind of stuff that gets said in the back room. And so our problems are seen first. And not only are they seen first, our assets aren't even recognized. And rather than when something happens and, oh my gosh, like Spidey, what do we do to make it better? Oh, well, this is just inevitable. So we are used to all this kind of blame, shame, stigmatizing, and heaven forbid we actually make mention of the fact that the supports that are there don't serve us, because now we're oversensitive, and now we are demanding too much because, oh, accommodations. Well, guess what? Again, we'll talk about how accommodations, if you're truly creating an inclusive environment, you don't need accommodations because it's all there. And so what happens is, rather than being defended when something goes wrong, again, it's almost like we deserve it. And if you're wondering about what your policies are like, and if you're doing it right, and if you're inclusive, the example I will give you is if you have two of your folks from your organization have something happen over the weekend, and a family member calls on Monday and says that they are not going to be at work, and one, it's because they had a heart attack, and the other one because they had a panic attack, and they are both hospitalized and under a doctor's care, and we don't know when they're going to be out, you better be treating them the same way. If the cardiac patient is getting better treatment that's just taken for granted as normal, and you're paperworking and when are you going to get back to work on the anxiety attack, you're doing it wrong. So we need to be seen like superheroes. Well, why do we need to be seen like superheroes, and why does it work? I'm not creating special snowflakes here, because one of the things about superheroes, and this is for the non-geeks in the room, please stop using the word superpowers because you bake muffins well, or you are good at hockey. That is not a superpower. A superpower always comes with positives and negatives. You cannot find a single superhero story, especially in the MCU, where it's all about the good stuff. No. It's good and bad. And what superheroes need to do is take these powers and balance them and figure out, how do I maximize the good and control the negative that can bring harm to myself and others? Well, guess what? Welcome to the day in the life of somebody with a mental health or neurodivergence diagnosis. So we have far more in common with them. And like them, some of us are born this way. Drax and Groot, that's just who they are. Same with all the X-Men and the mutants. We are born this way. That's how we came with these powers. We had no choice. They were given to us. It's who we are. Well, some folks like Spider-Man and Captain Marvel, sometimes these powers come because things happen to us. And in the same way that I sit there and say, yes, I am currently temporarily able-bodied because I don't know what's going to happen to me tomorrow that's going to maybe make physical accessibility a challenge tomorrow. It's the same thing with mental health, and even into some areas of neurodivergence, but potentially where you're currently not a superhero. Doesn't mean something tomorrow won't happen. I can't guarantee it's going to be as sexy as a spider bite or something else involving gamma radiation, but you're currently just not a superhero. There's nothing to say tomorrow you won't be given some powers, whether you want them or not. And regardless of how we get these powers, there's always a path. If these things overwhelm us, there's always a recovery arc, a path to redemption. And characters like Bucky Barnes and Bruce Banner, the Hulk, are phenomenal examples of that. In fact, Bruce Banner, I have to say, I love the MCU because it's taken parts of my program and literally made them canon. Bruce made a comment in Endgame about how he used to see the Hulk as a disease and something that needed to be gotten rid of. And then he realized, in fact, it was the cure. And look at me now, best of both worlds. And that's how he became Professor Hulk or Smart Hulk. I was literally in tears going, oh my God, Mark Ruffalo just made the entire premise of my program canon. And then topped it off when She-Hulk came out and Hulk sat down with his cousin Jen, who had just become a Hulk herself, and sat down and says, we're going to use dialectical behavioral therapy. And I went, oh, funny, I've been using Hulk to teach DBT for how many years now? Oh, canon again. So it's relevant. So these are all these kinds of things. So what thing is interesting about it is it's not that hard. It's easier than you think, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of, well, these are two of my favorite superhero ally combos. So I'm going to walk you through some of the superpowers that exist, and then talk about allies. Again, can't guarantee you're going to end up Nick Fury cool as an ally, but keep it in mind. And I have to say that this is one of these things where I appreciate the growth mindset here, and I'm going to take you on a little bit of an interesting journey. I'm also going to be using some language that's a little bit different, because one of the issues that we have for those of us with diagnoses is most of the language has the stigma baked right in. So part of the problem that we have right now is the use of disorder, deficit, or the prefix DYS in front of things. You can have the warmest, fuzziest program in the world, but if you are walking around, and this is about a broader clinical change, using this kind of language, the stigma's baked in. You are automatically telling me that there's something wrong with me. So for example, I have what most folks would know as ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Wow. Gee, why don't you just tell me I'm a crap human being as well? Now, I've actually warned folks on this stage, one of the things that those of us who have vast minds, and I'll explain that differently, we get time blindness. We get hyper-focused. So I've been joking with the Orion team here. If I run past time, come tackle me. I get it. I'm hyper-focused. I'm time-blind. I'll try to stick to the clock. Thank you for having it. That was one of my first concerns. So I'm going to walk you through some of our superpowers and either introduce you or reintroduce you to some wonderful superheroes. And the fact that these folks are probably already on your team, like most superheroes, we've just been living in stealth mode. So it might be you. It might be someone you know. So let's start off with Peter, Gwen, and Miles. 3 different versions of Spider-Man or Spider-Gwen. Well, guess what? What powers do they have? Their spidey senses tingle. They sense things. They are hyper-aware of things. Those are spidey senses. Guess what anxiety does? It does the exact same thing. Our survival instincts, our ability to, again, what in a previous time and place kept us from being tiger food, is heightened. So guess what we've got? We have got the ability, like these folks, to figure out where to swing the web next. If we are supported, we are your strategic thinkers, we are your planners, we are your quality folks, we are the people that can troubleshoot for you. And what's really interesting is that when we're not supported, we may feel like we have memory issues, but by God, we have got phenomenal memories. We tend to have a very high level of intelligence. And what's interesting is we have a heightened sensitivity usually to other folks' emotions. Again, spidey senses. Now, they can overwhelm us if unsupported, but we are your empathetic problem solvers. Again, we can swing and pivot and get that web to the next place. So rather than, again, the rolling the eyes about Dave and accounting, yada, da, 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 why don't you support him? Because guess what? He's going to be the guy that makes sure that you're ready for that audit. because he's already thought all that through. Why not run with that? So that brings us to another wonderful favorite of mine. This is Bucky Barnes. He is Steve Rogers, Captain America. He's his best friend. They go off into the war. He's captured by Hydra, and he has some horrific things done to him that means that he is triggered by a bunch of words that bring him into a very, very dark place. And so even when he comes back, he still questions himself, and he goes through that period of being the Winter Soldier and will eventually become the White Wolf in Wakanda. But the thing is that I use this as an analogy for depression, because once we've been in that dark place, again, when supported, you know what we have? We have grounded realism. Once I've been in that dark place, now that I'm in the light, I can still see what lurks in the shadows. Now, I might come off as the downer when there's a project that comes up and everybody, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm thrilled you all got your rose-colored glasses on. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but can we put in these things? I'm seeing things that you're not. Let's factor these in again. Not trying to rain on the parade, just trying to make sure that when the parade happens, that we're ready for the potential for the fact that it may rain, or one of the floats might get a flat tire. We have grounded realism. We also have a long-term perspective. We're tenacious, because by God, if you've been in the places that Bucky and I have been, if you've already won the battle with your own mind, you can pretty much take on anything and you're not afraid of anything. What that means is we have big picture connections, and you will find that most of us tend to be social justice activists and come from that perspective because, again, we don't want other people to go into the dark places we've been in. So we are loyal protectors. Now, here's one of the few canonically diagnosed folks. Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, is in fact bipolar. And one of the panels here shows him when he did his original self-diagnosis. Now, what's really interesting is that he is a creative explorer. And even when we see Scott come in to take on that role, but we still have Hank there as the elder mentor, you see that dynamic. And what you see are a collection of superheroes and entities that he has created. Everything from Ant-Man all the way up to Giant Man, Yellow Jacket. These are all manifestations of different things related to his creativity and exploration. And so what happens is, you know, he's seen as a prickly, mood-swinging, kind of hard to deal with creator. But what's interesting is that he's got that creativity, optimism, enthusiasm. Yes, again, are there the dark places? But when we are supported, we can tap into, there is nothing as, I guess you say, phenomenal as being in a supported, hypomanic, euphoric, creative state. The stuff you can do is phenomenal. Good example of somebody in the real world, Ted Turner. When he was supported well, that's when he built the empire that he did. So we are creative explorers. And then here's one of my favorites, Tony Stark. Now you'll notice that I call it rules, rituals, and getting it right. Think about Tony. Tony gives a wonderful arc in terms of recovery, because he's that guy, do not go into my lab. I am right. Do not touch that. I am yelling at the tech because they're not doing it right. My way or the highway. All the things because he needs control and he is right and he's done. Well, guess what? What he's got, though, is effectively anxiety on steroids. That's why he is matched so well and becomes a father figure to Peter Parker in the MCU. I get what you want to do, and I get that you want to be like me. Don't be like me. You don't want to go into this place. You don't want to go into that place. Here's your small gray area that you live in, because I know better, because I've been there, done that. But you know what's really wonderful is that tenacity, that strategic thinking is amped up with proficiency. And again, look at all those suits back there. That's upgrades. That is upgrades on steroids. He keeps upgrading, refining. We are your refiners. We are the people that, you know what, that's great, but you know what, I can take it up a notch. And as a result, he doesn't just upgrade his own suits, he builds stuff for Spider-Man. He builds stuff for Falcon. He builds stuff for Rhodey. In fact, even when as a consequence of some of his own issues and personal dynamics that played out, Rhodey ends up with the loss of the use of his legs. So he builds him this exoskeleton to help him. So we are your thinkers, we're tenacious, and we are learners because we literally learn that anything is possible when we are supported in recovery. That brings us to another two favorites. And in fact, Wolverine is probably one of the first people that I consciously bonded with. And that was because, like him, I felt like somebody's science experiment. And I lost my memory as a part of how I was treated in my own initial phases of diagnosis. And like him, in my bad places, guess what? Yeah, my claws can't come out. And I can be a harm to myself and others. But like Wolverine, guess what? It's one of those things where Wolverine, he's the king of the crappy days. Nobody has a bad day like Wolverine has a bad day. But he's no less a superhero on those days. So I sit there, and if I'm having a bad day, and I know that it's related to one of my diagnoses, okay, I'm just like Wolverine. He's still Wolverine. And you know what happens in the X-Men? They know that he might be prickly, and maybe they got to watch the claws, and by God, if Cyclops engages with him, you know words are going to be exchanged, and they will not be warm and fuzzy. But they know that if they surround him, nurture him, support him, and bring him back to that good place, they are golden. Because if Wolverine's got your back, you got nothing to worry about. He's loyal, he is tenacious, and he will look after you. So he is one phenomenal example of that post-traumatic growth, that protectiveness, that rebuilding to be better. And literally that's manifested in his superpowers, his recovery ability. Carol Danvers represents those kinds of traumas that we go through, especially things like the first movie was a wonderful representation of those microaggressions that we as women face in terms of misogyny baked into things. And that is manifest in any other form of social injustice that people experience microaggressions, whether that is related to their, being differently abled, whether it is regarding race, ethnicity, any other place where you are marginalized and you face microaggressions, guess what? That leads to complex PTSD. We often think of trauma as just the surviving a horrific event. No. Trauma is about an unhealed injury that is effectively left to fester and grow and multiply over a lifetime. So she was a phenomenal example of not only that, but then when she acquired her powers, she was basically brought into a relationship with Jan Rog, who is, oh my God, the poster boy for narcissistic abuse, who told her to hold back her powers, or hold back herself and manage her emotions. What it turns out is he was really afraid of her power. So she is a phenomenal example of this kind of skill set. But what does that mean as well? Powerful healers will look after other people literally because they are aware of trauma, will do their utmost to ensure that nobody goes down that path the same way. They will build in your safety structures, and they will pick up others and help them recover because they know what it's like to be there. But that's if we're supported and if we're understood. Another one that came up as a bit of a surprise was Thor. And Thor is awesome because he provided us with something that was a little outside the norm. And we saw him change, and we saw him sitting there in front of video games with Korg. Well, the thing is that he had issues that came from, again, trauma related to anxiety, self-acceptance, grief, loss. And basically what happened was he lost faith in himself. And those of us that end up having an unhealthy relationship with our body image and with our relationship with food, it's because something else is eating us. And this becomes the vehicle by which we can try to regain control. So it's an intersection of everything from anxiety to trauma, a variety of things. But what's interesting is, like Thor, we can get to that place of heroic acceptance. I am worthy. And once we are able to do that as part of our recovery, we're also able to help others with their recovery recognize that they too are worthy, and then unleash onto the world love and thunder. Now, these are my peeps. This is Blink and Nightcrawler. They are both teleporters from the X-Men, and they represent variable attention stimulus trait. This is one of the few terms that has changed clinically, or at least there is a wonderful doctor, Ned Hallowell, who himself lives with this diagnosis and finds this to be more accurate because it is neutral and it more accurately describes what's going on. As someone with a vast mind, I don't lack focus. Problem is you're not engaging me. And guess what? If you can engage somebody with a vast mind, you will be engaging everyone else in the room, just by default. We can be what others will perceive as distracted. No. I'm like a teleporter. I'm like these folks. I can pop in the way that they physically pop to different spots in the room or in and out of the room and gain new information. I'm doing that intellectually and with ideas. And the reason why they are feared or misunderstood by folks is the same reason why I am misunderstood. Because people can't figure it out. They can't go to the same places as me. They can't follow me. And that makes them uncomfortable. But again, we have creativity, strategic thinking skills. Not only do we connect dots differently, sometimes we're connecting dots that the rest of y'all aren't even seeing. So sometimes I find that I have to literally dial it back and explain things to folks because I realize I've just gone off on a journey and they're still trying to figure out where I am on the map. So we have these abilities. And again, there's creativity, leadership, all of these things that come with it. Now here's another one that I love. Again, hasn't made it to the movies yet. This is Takashi Matsuyo. He is the whiz kid. And the reason why I love him is that he reminds me so much of my son. Canonically, yes. He struggles with words, whether it is to read them or to write them. But he also has technokinesis, which means he is able to manipulate materials and things to transform them into whatever he needs. So that's actually Professor X's old chair that he's just made, space-worthy. But it's really representative of dyslexic skills. And by the way, that's now on LinkedIn, and yay, Richard Branson. Now we just need to get the words, to not have dis in front of them. So we got to find a vast reframing. But what's interesting is it parallels what I know of my own son. He is a storyteller. He is a narrator. He is phenomenal with words verbally. Just don't make him write them down. Skill sets, oh my God, this is the kid that used to, the dismantling and the rebuilding of things. If I have a problem, there's a set of spatial skills there. That technokinesis literally exists in a physical level. So there's an entire set of skill set. And what's interesting too is folks that have, again, these superpowers, we also tend to be what's called twice exceptional. So in other words, my son, who was failing in school, happens to be in the top 4% of IQs. The problem was they were trying to take all of his sharp, sparkly bits and where he lives out on different parts of different skill sets and neurodivergent spectrums and trying to shove him into the boring round hole of what it is to be neurotypical. Well, guess what? You broke off all his sparkly bits. He's suffering, and you're losing out on his skill set. So they are misread geniuses in many cases. Another one. This is Jubilee, another X-Men again. Only had bit parts in the movies, but she is a character who literally she has an issue around numbers. They can literally freeze her. So she represents dyscalculia, or again, that struggle with math is how we view it. Well, guess what? It's just seeing math differently. It's doing math differently. Again, my son is a wonderful example. He's a genius with Minecraft and Lego. Just don't make him write something down on a piece of paper. Let him talk it through, because if you can do Minecraft and Lego, which are effectively math, again, rockstar. This is a kid that at like 11 or 12 built on Minecraft models of 2 different kinds of proton accelerators. But he's not good at math. Excuse me. So it's about seeing numbers differently and seeing spatial relationships. And what's really interesting is there tends to be because there's been a struggle with learning, tend to be great teachers and great leaders because they know what it's like to not get the thing and do the workaround or have to explain their way of seeing to others. So again, like Jubilation Lee, we tend to be great leaders and dynamic thinkers. Groot. Now here we see baby Groot. Well, Groot literally is a time and space traveler. There's a conflict going on, and he's literally moving to his own beat. Well, that's because those with dyspraxia, again, are really about seeing time and space differently. So we have skill sets that can help us and help you see things differently in terms of your strategic planning. Another misunderstood part of neurodivergence is autistic folks. And Drax and Reed Richards represent literally the spectrum of superpowers. Communication issues, they're not about the fact that autistic folks don't communicate. They communicate differently. They are great BS detectors. Part of the issue around communication is not that they don't understand. They understand in some cases more than us, and you will see Reed's frustration there with the fact that why are we caught up in these things? We could just solve the problem. You guys are going through all these social dances. These are the little professors. These are logical, process-driven folks. And in the case of Drax, he's very literal, but again, he gets the job done. So these are some of the skill sets we bring to the table. So why does this matter? Well, first of all, yes, it's great for us to be acknowledged as superheroes, but we can't do this alone. And some of the best characters in the superhero world are actually our allies, and we need you. And like I said, you might not end up as cool as Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury, but we need you because your allyship and what you can do is to provide us with non-judgment. We didn't pick our powers. We don't pick our bad days. So don't judge us on that. Accept us and meet us where we are every day, knowing that every day changes for us. So just where I was yesterday might not be where I am today. I may be a few steps back. Meet me there and help me get forward again. And again, engagement. If you are not meeting us and engaging us, then it's not going to work. But what's interesting is that when you engage on this level, you actually create a healthy environment for everyone. So it's not about treating us differently. It's about opening up that space for us. So to wrap up with Peggy Carter, the world has changed and none of us can go back. All we can do is our best, and sometimes the best we can do is to start over. She is the founder of SHIELD. And she saw that what they needed to do was to literally break everything down and start over again. And started SHIELD that Nick Fury would eventually take over. And these two are the ultimate allies. So my question to you is, what's it going to take? Are you up for the challenge of forging a future that is truly mentally healthy and neuro-inclusive? Are you ready for that? And if you are ready, what are the beliefs that you're going to have to give up, whether it's personally or within your organization? And are you willing to take those steps and revisit? And are you willing to welcome aboard superheroes like myself to help you get there and forge that future? Thank you so much.
Wow, Sharon. Thank you very much for that. On a personal note, my son is dual exceptionality, and I kind of wish I'd had this talk 30 years ago. It may have helped my wife and I through a number of things, but fortunately he's on a good path, and so thank you very much for that. We have some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I believe there are microphones floating around somewhere. Yes, there's a microphone there. So do you have any questions for Sharon? Fortunately, while we're waiting to see if there's questions from the audience, I have a question for you. What do organizations need to consider or reconsider if they already offer mental health programs and support for their teams?
Well, I think, as I said, a lot of it is the fact that we've been seeing things, again, from this very diagnostic model, and it's well-intentioned. And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that it's not about your intentions, and it's wonderful if intentions are good, but if the impact is not what we need, if the impact is not 100%, it's not what we actually, if you're not meeting us where we're at, your intention doesn't matter, but you don't get to hide behind it or say, but we're doing this or da, da, da. we have to be able to have supports and programs and organizations that are informed by those of us with lived experience. And I know it's not easy to go and ask your team to disclose, because we are surrounded by stigma. And then in a lot of cases, a lot of us have lived undiagnosed for a very long time and have actually internalized a lot of the stigma issues too. So we might either not know, or again, literally we feel for our own mental health and well-being not saying these things. So it's about bringing on folks with lived experience. There are, it's really that willingness and that ability to break things down, the destruction that leads to creation, and in a sense, start from scratch. Now, that might sound like overwhelming and too much work, but you know what? There is nothing worse, and I learned this as a policy maker. When you are doing legislation and you've got the blah, 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 blah act, and then you keep making amendment this, amendment that, and you're basically post-it noting and duct taping and whatever, you get to a point where it's like, hey, guess what? We've just got to reissue a brand new piece of legislation. It's the same thing with your policies and these kinds of programs. They tend to be coming from a systems-based perspective. They tend to be, one of the things that's always broken my heart is, like, well, we're following the policy, and this is a good thing. It's like, yeah, again, I get what you think you're doing. So I think we have to be willing to accept the fact that as good as we think something is, it can be better. And you know what? Think about it this way. If all you're giving your team is good enough, but you're expecting great things out of them, how are they going to do that? If you're only giving them good enough, don't they deserve better if you're expecting more from them? So you've got to step up, and that ultimately, in the end, again, you get that larger return on investment because you do have a truly inclusive space. And you're tapping into your team's superpowers.
Well, with that, I'd really like to, I don't see there is one question here up at the front. And there's one back there as well. So
okay, cool.
Who's first? Go ahead.
And if we want to become an ally, how do we start on that path to be the ally for our superheroes in our organization? Especially when they're having those bad days, how do we build up the skill set to be a good partner as an ally?
Yeah, well, and that's an excellent question. And so it comes down to, again, the non-judgment, the acceptance, and the engagement. So the non-judgment, recognize that, again, okay, somebody's having a bad day. So it's not a character flaw. It's not a deficit. It's not that they are broken or something is wrong. It is literally a bad day and they didn't choose it. Nobody wakes up and says, hey, you know what? I want to be in the 9th ring of a depressive hell. Nope, nobody does that. Nobody. So that happened to us. And by giving us support and maybe saying, well, okay, what is it that you need today? And understanding that if they, again, think of Wolverine and the claws, they're coming out a little prickly. It's not a personal attack on you. It's a case of they are literally being overwhelmed by those powers. And in the same way that you would, watch yourself as you're not going to go hug Wolverine while he's full claws out. You come to them and it's, what do you need? How can I meet you? And some cases, and this is the other thing too, is that a lot of times when people are in crisis or they're at a place where it may go one way or the other and they need to talk, one of the first things to ask is, do you need to just let this out? Are you looking for an ear? Or are you looking for someone to help you problem solve? Because a lot of times we like to fix things and help people. And a lot of times when we are in crisis, we just need to dump. We need to get some stuff out. And then in some cases, we might not realize it at the time, we're engaging in our own process solving. So maybe we'll say, I just need to dump, and then partway through the equation, well, actually, hold on, what, could you help me with this, or maybe I need that. So that's the other part, is to figure out what it is they need, and sometimes it's for y'all to just sit there and listen, and at best ask questions, and sometimes they'll say, well, what do you need? And you're like, I don't know, because again, you're in crisis. Okay, well, it sounds like you're really stressed out. Would it make sense for you to go home? Is there someone that you would feel safer with? Is there what? And you can just make some, again, suggestions to get, to possibly lead things, but you're not dragging anybody by the nose. You're certainly not shoulding on them. That is not cool. And so just those kinds of things, but it's to be there to, again, accept us with non-judgment, know that this is, again, not a personality flaw, not a whatever, and then, again, engage us. So what I gave you there was an example of those three things, and it's not actually a lot of work, and you know what's really interesting is that engaging people this way is actually, in the long run, even from your own sort of personal, psychological, mental health perspective, is far less energy than forcing people through policy hoops. And while the program only does this and the EAP only does that, and you're only allowed X number of days, you actually end up, like, that's basically gas on a fire. And that's not even like, here's my Bic and like the jerry can that I use for my lawnmower. Sometimes you're at full on, I got a blowtorch and a tanker truck. And that you're making it more work for everyone, yourself included. So that's where allyship is see things from our perspective. And again, we're not special snowflakes, we're doing a balancing act. And again, we could all use a Peggy Carter, Nick Fury, Hawkeye, Natasha in our lives.
Yep. Well, I think with that, we are at break time. Maybe Shadel, you can catch up with Sharon afterwards. The break is sponsored by IBM. So IBM, thank you very much. We have a break till 10:45, and then I believe we reconvene here. And so with that, Sharon, thank you so much for a fun and entertaining and thought-provoking talk. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. It's been awesome. Oh, okay. Oh, well, thank you.